Hello, everybody. This is Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for tuning in for a few minutes. I want to say happy birthday to a very important man, a great American. His name was Thurgood Marshall, Justice Thurgood Marshall. I want to take a few minutes to remember this great man and the importance of this man's life and work in the African American community. Spend a few minutes with me as I celebrate Justice Thurgood Marshall. On a legal level, I really cannot think of anyone who is more important to the African American experience, you know what, to the American experience, than Thurgood Marshall. And I mean that in all sincerity. This man is a total, absolute legend, a legal legend in the African American community. As you see, Justice Thurgood Marshall was the first African American to sit on the United States Supreme Court. Additionally, Justice Marshall led the legal team that won major Supreme Court cases that desegregated public education, culminating in the Brown versus Board of Education case. I cannot tell you how important the Brown case was to African Americans. But Justice Marshall, long before the Brown versus Board of Education case came along, Justice Marshall had already done some very important work. The Brown versus Board of Education case was like, again, the culmination of his work. What he did was, he and the LDF, the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, they litigated desegregation cases in law schools and colleges before they tackled public education for elementary kids and, K through 12 and so forth, because they knew they would get hard resistance from that. It's one thing for white Americans to deal with sitting in a law class or a college classroom, but they knew it would be a very tough pill to swallow back in that day for whites to send their children to sit in classrooms with black children. So they sort of broke down the segregation one brick at a time until they got to public education K through 12. And Justice Marshall led the fight all the way. One of the things that stands out with me about Justice Marshall is they say that when he would be down in the South fighting those legal battles, oftentimes he would be sitting in the back of the bus. On his way to court. And he didn't make a big deal out of it because he knew he was attacking the big one. So he didn't want to allow where he was sitting on the bus to interfere with his fight to desegregate public education. What a smart, measured man he was. And the reason the Brown case was so important and still is important is the law of the land before Brown versus Board of Education was Plessy v. Ferguson, which basically said segregation was okay so long as it was equal, so long as the schools for black kids were equal. So that was the law of the land. Needless to say, the public schools for serving African American children were not equal. And by the way, since I'll be 62, my birthday, I actually remember segregation. The first 2 years, I want to say, of elementary school for me was in a segregated elementary school. The name of the school was C.W. Dobbins. Everybody back home from where I came from, Wallace, North Carolina, you all of age, you all remember C.W. Dobbins. That was the elementary school that black kids went to in the Wallace area. Okay. And so I remember it was in third grade that segregation was outlawed. And what they did in my community is they shut down a lot of the black schools and sent us to the white schools. So I went from C.W. Dobbins Elementary School. In my third grade year, I left the C.W. Dobbins Elementary School and went to Wallace Elementary, which was a predominantly white school. And let me tell you, they were not equal. Okay, C.W. Dobbins did not have the resources that Wallace Elementary had. So the whole Plessy v. Ferguson case and what it stood for was a total lie anyway. The only part of separate but equal that was true was the separate part. The equal part was never true. So the Brown v. Board of Education case tore that down and enabled black kids to go to schools that had better facilities, better books, better resources, etc. Not better teachers, okay? I had great teachers in elementary school. We didn't have better teachers. We did, however, again, in the white schools, we did have better resources, better books, etc., etc. So that, that's just a little bit of the great work that Thurgood Marshall did on behalf of African Americans. Another reason I wanted to talk about him for a few minutes this afternoon is because of what is actually going on the U.S. Supreme Court today. First, I am very grateful that Ketanji Brown Jackson is on the court so that she can counter all of the foolishness that Clarence Thomas, who took Thurgood Marshall's position on the court or his seat, all the stuff that Thomas is doing. We have waited and waited and waited. In fact, I wanted Obama to nominate a black woman back when he nominated Sotomayor or Kagan. I mean, I was like, come on. I mean, how can you not put a black woman on the court? He didn't do it. Joe Biden got it done. I held that against Obama, still do to this day, because he should have put a woman on the court the first chance he got. Anyway, she's finally on the court, and I have kept up with her. The Alabama racial gerrymandering case that the court decided recently and surprisingly in favor of the plaintiffs. I listened to her questioning, doing oral argument. It was absolutely brilliant. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Really, it was a breath of fresh air. And similarly, her dissenting opinion in this recent affirmative action case. Oh, wow, folks, please take my word for it. She said what 99.9% of us African Americans would have wanted to say if we were standing there arguing before the court. She said what we felt, what we know to be the truth, what we have experienced down throughout the years. She said it for us in her dissenting opinion. I was just floored. And I would say that Justice Jackson has become the leader of the Marshall wing of the court. All right. I would say that she has taken up that leadership role. Now, I'm grateful for Sotomayor and all that she has done to advocate for Black and brown people, as well as Alina Kagan, all that she has done, Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor. But it's just different with Ketanji Brown Jackson, a sister, a sister. Now, some folks hold it against her that she's married to a white man. I don't care. One reason I don't care is because Thurgood Marshall was married to, I think, a Filipino woman. That made no difference in his jurisprudence whatsoever. And the fact that Ketanji Brown Jackson is married to a white man does not seem to have any impact on her jurisprudence, her philosophy, her ideology, at all, at all. So that doesn't matter at all. I am just grateful that someone is finally on the court, an African American, who can again speak up for the Marshall wing of the court, because Justice Marshall would just really be probably turning over in his grave to know that the man who replaced him is voting with white conservatives against the Black community on nearly every case. He voted against or voted for the um, to take affirmative action down. I'm talking about Clarence Thomas. I mean, this was the man that they put to replace Justice Marshall. Justice Marshall spent several decades fighting white conservatives like William Rehnquist, who was the Chief Justice for most of the time that Justice Marshall was on the bench. And they went at it. He went at it. He went at it with Rehnquist, who was changing all sorts of things, trying to undermine all that the civil rights movement intended or all that the civil rights movement accomplished, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You see what's happened to that, right? You see what's happened to the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. They nearly have gutted the Voting Rights Act, one of the absolute most important pieces of legislation ever for the African American community. White conservatives have nearly gutted it. The only thing that's left of it is Section 2, and Section 2 is wobbling, to put it bluntly. Okay? And I know that the court here recently, again, ruled in favor of the plaintiffs based on a Section 2 racial gerrymandering case. I know that. I understand that. But I think they did that because they knew the affirmative action case had been struck down. And so this was just a little bit of, just a little piece of cake to try to, to appease Black folks. Well, it didn't work. It didn't work. All right. So anyway, back to Justice Marshall. I know it would just be very disappointing, as much as that man fought against the racism of white conservatives on the court, to see the person who replaced him vote with them 100% of the time. And then to learn that Justice Thomas has taken expensive trips from a rich white billionaire from the Dallas area. I mean, that's another reason why I had to take some time out of my Sunday afternoon just to remember Justice Thurgood Marshall. He was born July 2nd, 1908. 1908. I think that was 105 years ago, if my math is correct. If it's not, forgive me, but I believe that may be correct. That's not correct, as I think about it. That's not correct. But he would have been very old, okay? But enough cannot be said about the work that Justice Marshall did and what he accomplished for the African American community. Most importantly, probably, is the Brown versus Board of Education case. And then him fighting tooth and nail to protect the civil rights legacy while he was on the court fighting against, again, people like William Rehnquist, who was a hardcore right-wing, white conservative, white supremacist. Justice Marshall was there fighting him tooth and nail. And for the last, 30 years since Justice Marshall has been off the bench, there has been no African American on the court to counter Clarence Thomas until Sister Girl hit the court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. So, we needed to take the time to say thank you to Justice Marshall and to point out how extremely important what he did on the court was. Here's just some things said about him on the Legal Defense Fund, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He was born July 2nd, 1908, like I said, in Baltimore, Maryland. He started his association with the NAACP when he won a desegregation case for them at the University of Maryland Law School. And by the way, Charles Hamilton Houston was his mentor, okay, who sort of trained Justice Marshall. You don't hear a lot about Charles Hamilton Houston, but he was a very important figure in the background to Justice Marshall. And so, Lyndon Johnson nominated Thurgood Marshall for the bench. And so he became a Supreme Court justice, the first black one to do it. And it's just, again, so sad that he was replaced with a person like Clarence Thomas. Just sad, just totally sad. But anyway, again, just join me in remembering Justice Thurgood Marshall. You know, he means a lot to me. As an attorney, I have a picture of him up in my office. I've read all his books. He's just a hero of mine, and he is to many African American attorneys and quite a few white attorneys who are in this space of civil rights. They appreciate him as well. So I could not let this day go past without saying something about the late Justice Thurgood Marshall. And I'm so thankful for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson being on the court now, and who I would again coin to be the leader of the Thurgood Marshall wing of the court. Okay? All right? So enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. Have you a good time. Get you some rest. The 4th of July is coming up, which means nothing to me, by the way. I celebrated Independence Day back on June 19th, 2023. So this will just be another day for me. But I had to say, happy birthday to Justice Thurgood Marshall. You all be blessed. I'm out.